Get back to business kahapon, of course, pinag-usapan natin yung mga latest na nangyari sa ating bansa kasama si Ronald Llamas, aka AK-47. Ronald Llamas, di ba? Ibang klase talaga kasama yan si Secretary Llamas. Talagang mahirap pag-usapan ng mga seryosong bagay kasi he's gonna drop, yung mga joke bombs niya. Medyo mahirap na. But I hope na-appreciate nyo yung comprehensive discussion namin kahapon. Ang dami namin pinag-usapan. 2 hours yung conversation. Medyo nagko-complain na siya about his labor rights. Ayan, nagpaparinig na naman si Boy Ta. Ayan naman. Ay nako, parati ko sinasabi. Ayan si Ronald, siya pa yung parati nagme-message sa akin. Pagkatapos pa lang nung 2 hour talk namin kahapon, message na naman siya. Yung next topic ng iniisip niya. So ewan ko dyan sa voluntary servitude dynamics na nangyari dito. Anyway, thank you very much nga sa lahat ng mga nakinig sa atin. Ito. Ang dami mga developments today. Obviously, ito, may bago na tayo officially, Agriculture Secretary. Of course, this shouldn't come as a total surprise, not only in terms of having a new Agriculture Secretary, but also in terms of, malakas yung effect ng coffee sa atin. Also in terms of the person appointed as the Agriculture Secretary. This name has been dropped and has been circulating for quite some time. So an ex-businessman, or officially now an ex-businessman kasi nagkakaroon na daw ng divestment to avoid conflict of interest, is now taking over as Department of Agriculture. Yung ngiting tagumpay ni BBM in a sense na magkakaroon na siya ng plausible deniability. So if things go wrong with food security, at least may iba siyang mabe-blame, hindi lang sarili niya. Because before nga, bilang Agriculture Secretary, he's gonna get double blame, both as a president and also as the Agriculture Secretary. So now he's putting some sort of safety stance between himself and the issue. Now, let's talk about shortly about yung itong, we'll talk about shortly, itong new Agriculture Secretary natin. Let's look at the broader dynamics. Is this the right person? How could this become the right person? Or and what are the issues moving forward? Of course, today also, andito po si Prime Minister Fumio Kishida ng Japan dito sa Manila. So kanina medyo nag-drop by tayo dun sa Manila area to talk to one of his cabinet ministers. So na-briefing po tayo about yung ito, by the way, thank you rin. Briefing po tayo naman. Na-briefing po tayo dito sa mga future ng alliance natin. So may briefing kami kanina. So I'll go through it a little bit later on. Of course, I mean, not the confidential part and all, but just to see that there's a lot that we're discussing with our alliance. So expect big things to be announced tomorrow dun sa joint session of the Philippine Congress, the best in the world. Yeah, confidential funds. Ayan. Bukas mag-address sa Philippine legislature ang Prime Minister ng Japan. So we're gonna see more big announcements. No, aside from the fact na our subway in Manila, believe it or not, magkakaroon tayo ng subway in the next 3 to 5 years, God willing. There are going to be discussions about new major investments that Japan is looking at, including sa green infrastructure in terms of agriculture. This is something very close to the heart of the president, of course, close to the guts of the Filipino people. So Japan is looking at a lot of things, and of course, on my part, I've been pushing our allies and friends to help the Philippines to also develop cutting-edge industries, including semiconductors. No, so there's a lot that we can discuss. Hopefully, the Philippines could also transform into what can be called as a regional hub for automotive production. Believe me or not, that's a discussion on the table right now to hopefully bring more Japanese cars to be built or at least assembled significantly here in the Philippines. Maybe 60%, 70%. Maybe the engines will come from Japan or Thailand, unless it's Lexus that comes straight from Japan. But at least you build some of the cars here in the Philippines. Hindi lang Vios yatang binibuild sa Philippines. No? But you want to get others. Altis, Fortuner, I think Thailand yung nagbi-build for quite some time, and I think the engine is based on Hilux, which was developed by Toyota Australia. See, I do my research, no? So we're looking at many things, and pag-usapan natin very shortly. Of course, close to our heart, pumunta rin sa Rizal Memorial si Prime Minister Kishida kanina lang. So, it's close to my heart. Alam mo naman, may soft spot tayo pag Rizal, so I'm glad that the Japanese Prime Minister is paying this sincere respect to the Filipino independence of superhero, if I can put it that way. Now, obviously, when it comes to Japan, remember kahapon, pinag-usapan namin, kausap natin si Ronaldo Llamas. Ronaldo! Si Ronald Llamas, pinag-usapan natin among other things. Of course, the historical baggage of Japan, the horrible things that Imperial Japan did in the Philippines. I ask my lola if you don't believe it. And of course, the comfort women issue. So, may baggage talagang Japan sa Philippines. But eto na nga mga kameta, we're gonna move towards a visiting forces agreement style of deal. I think the term is going to be reciprocal access agreement, RAA or RAA. And of course, there are bigger discussions here about Japan, Philippine, U.S. trilateral alliance, what I call JAFUS. No, I coined it. Okay, JAFUS, right? So among other things I coined, pledge trap, isa pa ito JAFUS. No, so ito yung mga mga 2022, 2023 words na kinukoin natin. I hope it picks up. I think the Japanese liked it when I mentioned JAFUS. I said JAFUS, AUKUS. It kind of rhymes, right? All these trilateral alliances emerging with, of course, who they have in mind. All of these alliances, right? Trilateral alliances. So, minilateralist cooperation. Now, balikan natin ito mga kameta. Bago tayo pumunta more to geopolitics and all, of course, tomorrow we'll have more discussions as Prime Minister Kishida announces big initiatives, bilateral security cooperation initiatives, bilateral economic cooperation initiatives. And of course, God willing, tomorrow also we're looking to having another co-host dun sa iba pa natin mga projects. This time, Nexus, of course, with Dr. Lisandro Claudia. I think Leloy Claudia just recently also hosted Vice President Leni Robredo dyan sa California, sa Berkeley. So, pag-usapan natin, how was his meeting with Vice President Leni Robredo? What is his reading of the ongoing culture wars in the United States, including culture wars vis-a-vis what's happening in the Middle East right now, explosion of Islamophobia, explosion of anti-Semitism, all of this very worrying prejudice situation. We'll ask Dr. Claudia about these issues, among others. Pag-usapan din natin ng Pilipinas. Of course, I encourage you guys to also check yung isang episode namin ni Leloy Claudia about the secret history of Philippine-Japan relations. So we're gonna look at Philippine-Japan relations all the way to our ilustrados and how some of our ilustrados ended up in Tokyo and in Japan. And later on, of course, Japan, Makapili, all of those things. Manuel Quezon trying to triangulate among Japanese emerging empire and the American empire a century ago. So lahat ng pinag-usapan namin. So please check that out. It's a fascinating conversation we had. So we look forward to having more conversation also with my other co-host na hindi masyado nagreklamo dun sa daldal namin. Nagpaparinig na naman tayo. And nagpaparinig siya eh. Di paparinig rin ako sa kanya. O guest tonight siguro si Ronaldo kay no. Anyway, let's go back to this. Pag-usapan muna natin itong latest cabinet reshuffle, which everyone expected, because if you look at the Okta survey that came out, it more or less confirmed what Pulse Asia survey has been saying for quite some time, which is discontent is building up when it comes to food inflation, not just inflation, but food inflation, and discontent is building on when it comes to management of food security in the country. And of course, that really came at the cost of the president. So now the president really has to do something about it. Well, President Marcos Jr., at least in theory and in principle, highlighted yung kahalagaan ng issue ng agriculture, food security. But then again, we need someone who knows something about this business, right? And literally, it looks like a businessman was picked up to deal with the agriculture, the conundrum in the Philippines, to put it nicely, no? To put it nicely. So let's see whether this is politically a wise move and meritocratically, technocratically, is this the wise move? So, pag-usapan natin, ano yung background nitong bagong cabinet minister natin? Of course, minister, kasi Japan yung kausap ko ngayon sa kanya, cabinet minister. Cabinet secretary natin, anong ambag nito? Pag-usapan natin yan, bakit itong lumabas? Let's look at it. So, what is the background ng itong bagong cabinet minister natin, cabinet secretary natin? Pag-usapan natin yan. Alright, here you go. Ito. So, meron tayong infographic dito. Okay, siya po ay graduate ng University of Santo Tomas. Yan, yung mga Tomasian dyan, in the house. Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. Oh, so computer science pala yung background niya. Matalino to Medyo, competitive, quota course yan. Yung mga organizations na in the past, Confederation of Philippine Tuna Industry, ayan, yung mga mahilig sa tuna dyan, masarap naman dyan. Processing Sector, Bangus Council of the Philippines, nako, may tuna ka pa, may bangus ka pa. Yung isa pang ibang organization, so he was the president of the tuna industry, Confederation of the Philippines. He was the chairman of the processing sector, Bangus Council of the Philippines. He was also the chairman of World Tuna per Senior Seiner organization, organization, and he was the director of Inter-Island Deep Sea Fishing Association. So it looks like this is a person who has had many senior positions in many relevant business-oriented organization, not government, but business-oriented organization. Yung recent positions na is member of the Private Sector Advisory Council. So ito yung advisory council na binubuo ng mga big business big businessmen, of course. Hindi na tayo tatay style, di na using mga oligarch, mga ganyan. Ito. So ito yung mga private, ito yung parang version ni Trump ng yung mga tech giants, mga Elon Musk, yung mga ganun type. President din siya ng Frabel Fishing Corporation from 1985 to 2023. So I think ito yung company niya. So before I was born, president na siya ng itong company na, which I think was found by his parents. So this is he comes from a multi-generation business family. Frabel Fishing Corporation is the private partner of the proposed 90 hectares Bacoor Reclamation Development Project. So that's a big one. And 230 hectares Bacoor Reclamation and Development Project along the coastline of Manila Bay. So yung company nila medyo may kinalaman doon sa mga reclamation projects na nangyari dito sa Manila Bay. Obviously, in a separate vlog, pinag-usapan din natin mga concerns sa mga reclamation projects. As you know, one of the companies involved there is a Chinese company, panidigong na negotiate yan, which is associated to the company that did all of those fake islands in the West Philippine Sea in clear violation of international law and the Philippine sovereignty. Now, siya rin po ay naging chairman and president of Agusan Power Corporation, again, from 1985 to 2023. So, Agusan Power Corporation is a proponent of the 24.9 mega Lake Mainit Hydropower Project, 24.9 W in Agusan del Norte. So involved din siya sa private power sector and other power generation sector. This is quite big. Now, according dito sa infographics na meron tayo, malaki din ang of course, this is really the deal, right? Medyo malaki-laki yung kanyang reportedly, malaking kanyang donation to at least 3 campaigns. Campaign ni President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Surprise! I'm so surprised. Also to the campaign of current Senate President Mig Zubiri. And also to yung favorite senator natin, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Alright, magandang yung isa naging presidente, yung isa naging Senate President, yung isa nag-top ng Senate. Mahusay mag-investo. Then, I'm just kidding. Mahusay pumili ng candidates for election nito. Baka naman sir, baka naman next election. Baka kung may balak tayo. Ito. So, ito ayon sa report, ito infographic na nakuha natin dyan. Now you know, okay, post natin dyan sa baba. So let's talk more about this. There's also this number of reports online about this thing. I-post ko yung infographic mamaya, tsaka yung source na, so you can check it on your own. So, hindi naman ito yung Dennis Uy level na diba? Ibang usapan. Anyway, balikan natin to. Nasaan na? Ayan, ito. Check natin ito. Okay, so ayon sa Malacanang, doon sa kanyang speech sa Malacanang kanina, sinabi ni Secretary Laurel na tinuturi niyang kapatid, yung mga ating mga mangingisda at saka magsasaka. Sabi niya, malapit sa puso ko ang mga kapatid nating magsasaka at mangingisda dahil personal kong natunghayan ang mga hirap at pangarap nila. Asahan po niyong laging bukas ang aking tanggapan para sa inyong lahat. Ayan, of course, obviously, businessmen, very rich businessmen are very close, to the situation on the ground. They understand the difficulties faced by our ordinary folks, quote unquote, no? So yung mga hindi nakakaintindi ng Tagalog or hindi nakakaintindi ng konyo kong Tagalog, ito po yung translation. Our farmers and fisher folks are close to my heart because I've personally witnessed their hardships and dreams. Expect my office to be always open to all of you. Yan. Okay. All right. This is it. So, yung kanyang parents po, si Francis and Bella Tew Laurel, sila po yung nag-establish ng Frabel as a small troll fishing company in the Philippines. Now, yung operations ng Frabel family has now expanded into Western and Central Pacific regions. So, where a large share of the world's tuna can be found. So, medyo may pagka-international na talaga, no? And he has also helped lead the company extend their market into Europe, Middle East, South Africa, and the United States. So, this is a global businessman, right? Now, obviously, one concern that's being raised is what's going to happen to those companies. Has he divested? Now, according dun sa mga reports, nag-divest na po siya sa mga big companies na yan because, yun nga, I mean, you want to make sure if someone is in a position of power that has to do something with agriculture sector and then that person happens to come from a business background that may have a thing or two to do with agriculture sector, you want to make sure na hindi magkakaroon ng conflict of interest. So divestments have been happening. Sabi nga ni Laurel in a commencement speech to UP Visayas back in 2019, Frabel is a concrete example of how a fisheries-based company operated and managed by Pinoys can succeed and can become a leader in the fishing industry, not only in the Philippines but in the world. So quite an ambitious person, quite a successful person. In the past also, he said his father made it a point to send him to Japan to learn from experts in the industry. So Japan, of course, is the largest. So this is a person that, has global experience, has been running a company, a family company globally. So in fairness, it looks like my business acumen naman siya. And it looks like this is someone who has also the discipline and the entrepreneurial spirit to push the boundaries of a Filipino-driven global business. I mean, this is good. This is good. This is very impressive. Now, the question, though, is, of course, because now divestments have happened, of course, we have to make sure na, of course, yung conflict of interest issue, I'm sure that issue is gonna be raised by critics among others who had perhaps other people in mind. I don't know, Kiko Pangilinan or someone who comes from a more civil society, magsasaka background, etc. But again, so far it looks like divestment happened and the issue of conflict of interest, at least technically, legally speaking, should not be an issue. But then again, the other question that we should raise here is, does success in the private business sector necessarily translate into success into government sector? Because if you look at it, the government doesn't run by the same logic as business. In business, in private business, it's all about profit generation. Right? Because if you don't generate profit, you're out of business. You're going to be eaten alive. So it's a kind of a competitive Darwinian situation when it comes to businesses. Now, of course, some businesses are more in a competition situation, cooperative competition, but some of them are cutthroat competitive companies. But at the end of the day, companies, private sectors, private companies are fundamentally about profit because that's what keeps them going and keeps them alive in a competitive Darwinian struggle with other major companies, internationally, locally. Now, in the government, you're dealing with something very different. In the government, it's not about profit. It's not necessarily about performance output-oriented criteria. It's about accountability. It's about transparency. It's about long-term planning and vision. It's about redistribution. So there are many, many elements that are important to being an effective public statesman that may not necessarily be relevant if you're a businessman. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that just because you were a businessman, you're not necessarily qualified for the government. What I'm saying is that being a good businessman doesn't necessarily make you a successful statesman. But in history, we have many contradictory cases. Like, Donald Trump came in and said, I was a businessman, although questionable kung talagang yung mga claims niya about being billionaire. And we saw, his administration was shambolic. For anyone who actually bothers to research and all, his administration was shambolic. And, he ran his administration like a, Trump celebrity show. Not necessarily like a president who knows his portfolio. At the same time, of course, we also have cases like Silvio Berlusconi in Italy, no, who was a very successful media mogul. He was a very very skillful politician and populist, but it was under his reign that Italy was transformed into a kind of a fiscal nightmare, and eventually the Italian economy met a huge debt crisis by 2008 2009, and that forced him out of power. So we have a lot of examples of even business moguls coming to power at the highest levels and not doing well. But at the same time, we also have many cases of people with business background who were quite good in government. So, for instance, Mitt Romney, the former governor of Massachusetts, he had a business background. I think he was also active in Boston Consultancy, among others. And yet, he was quite an effective governor of Massachusetts. Considering he's a Republican, he was very effective as a kind of a bipartisan almost governor. In the case of a more democratic leaning Massachusetts, one of the richest and most developed states in America. So it's a case to case basis, no? Now all of the examples I gave you are from first world countries, right? Italy, well, yes, it's still a first world, U.S., whatever. But looking at the Philippines, mas komplikado pa kasi governance sa Philippines. If you look at it, mas mahirap ang public policy and public administration sa Philippines because sobrang sobrang, how should I put it, hilaw pa yung mga institution natin, di ba? Rules are kind of arbitrary, not in terms, I mean, officially there's laws and all of that, but we know in reality, very arbitrary ang governance sa ating bansa because our democratic institutions are underdeveloped, our state institutions are still not naman primeval, but definitely not fully modernized yet. So you need a certain level of EQ, leadership skills, and visionary statesmanship in order really to overhaul yung mga problematic cabinet ministers. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Laurel, on paper at least, he looks like a very qualified person to run a cabinet position. Having said that, we have to keep in mind we're talking about the agriculture sector in the Philippines, which has been an abject failure, administration after administration after administration, right? Because if we were not an abject failure, right, how do you explain the fact that the Philippines went from a kind of a rice exporting country to the biggest importer of rice on earth, ahead of China? I mean, this is crazy, right? How do you explain the fact that an average Filipino farmer is what, more than 50-year-old? So way into their middle ages. Ang ating average age of our fish yung ating mga magsasaka. Tingnan mo yung irrigation system natin. More or less yung irrigation system natin, yung million hectare na irrigated lands natin. This is essentially infrastructure maintained from Marcos era. Marcos had 21 years to do something. At least one of the good things he did was build the infrastructure, the irrigation system there. So the question here is, nasagutin ka. To build the irrigation system here, sasagutin ka, sorry. Build the irrigation system in the Philippines, and we kind of more or less maintain that. Okay, wait lang, sandali lang, kailangan ko sagutin yan. Hello? Yes, good evening po. Pwede ba akit? Okay lang, if ever. Sige po. Salamat. Thank you. Yan. Marcos kasing topic, biglang may kumatok. Ayan. Alright, balikan natin yung mga komenta. So clearly we have a failure. And then you look at the land reform program in the Philippines. One economist put it as the longest running failed land reform program anywhere on earth, right? So clearly there is a huge problem with our agriculture sector. I mean, look at how much ahead Thailand and Vietnam are. I mean, if you have been to rural areas in Thailand, my goodness, yung asphalto pa lang mas maganda sa mga syudad natin, right? Thaksin was a very problematic populist, a demagogue even. But one of the good things that Thaksin did was to build the basic infrastructure in the rural areas, bring healthcare to the farmers. And that's why Thailand is one of the most agriculturally empowered countries. I mean, they're agricultural superpower. Vietnam even more successful. I mean, Vietnam is a source of more than 80% of our total rice imports. And Vietnam is also a rice eating country. They have a very similar kind of, they have a lot of reliance also on rice, although they also do a lot of noodles. Pero yung noodles nila, alam nyo naman, comes also from rice, right? But anyway, let's not get into cuisine and all. But you get what I'm saying? Like, Vietnam also, the land reform, although communist kasi, so they have a different approach. For me, Thailand is more interesting because Thailand is not a communist socialistic country. And yet, they were able to develop a quite equitable and very progressive, a very world-class agriculture sector. And then Vietnam is head and shoulders above all of us in terms of land reform, in terms of developing their agricultural sector. So clearly, malaki, heavy lifting talagang kailangan natin dito sa agriculture sector. So looking at the background of the just appointed agriculture secretary, this looks like a very successful businessman, but I'm not sure that that necessarily translates into being a successful cabinet secretary in charge of a very problematic bureaucracy. When I say problem, I don't mean it against people who are there right now. I had a chance to meet some of the people from the Department of Agriculture, fantastic people, and a lot of them were saying that they're glad that President Marcos is leveraging yung bully pulpit ng kanyang presidency to empower the Department of Agriculture. But we know that you need really long-term structural reforms. Hindi lang mga pa-cute here and there, but long-term structural reforms to deal with issues in the agriculture sector. And speaking of agriculture sector, one of the things we need is make sure itong Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund is not going to take away money from itong mga Philippine Development Bank, yung mga land bank, which were made precisely to help develop our agricultural sector infrastructure and also help yung ating mga farmers and all that. So, this is really going to be a lot of heavy lifting. And I don't know what's the backstory. Was this offered to other people na probably even more suited for the job and they didn't take it up? So I don't know. Magmarites pa tayo about that. But so far I'm saying on paper, it looks like this is a very successful businessman, and our best wishes to our new agriculture secretary. But at the same time, we have to look at how this is going to work. So someone is asking me if is agriculture more complicated than fishing. I mean, you know that fisheries can also, agriculture industry can be seen in much wider way to also cover the fisheries industry. But anyway, even if we separate the two, in the agriculture sector, you're dealing with land reform problems. You're dealing with rural infrastructure development issues. And guess what? Sino mga kalaban mo if you want to do a big shake-up of the system? Ang kalaban mo dyan, yung mga warlords and political dynasties. Why do you think our agriculture sector is very, very ineffective and backward? Is because of the feudal system that we have in the Philippines peripheries. Why do we have a very feudal system in the Philippines peripheries? Is because of the trapos, because of the dynasties, because of the warlords. So what are you going to do about them? You're going to be nice to them, or you're going to do something significant? Well, the communist Vietnamese had their way of dealing with them. In Thailand, they had a strong-willed populist like Thaksin to also deal with them. In the Philippines so far, nada, zilch. So let's see what's going to happen here. Is appointing a businessman, a successful businessman, the best way to deal with the feudalistic political economy we have in our agriculture sector? Or is there another way outside the box that perhaps can help us move forward? In the meantime, good news for BBM is that he will have 1 degree of separation from this very thorny issue. It remains to be seen though, because after all, it's Marcos who chose his successor in the Department of Agriculture. If ever the food security problem persists, I'm not also necessarily sure that the voters will say, okay, since hindi na DA Secretary si BBM, I'll be nicer to him. I don't think that will necessarily happen, but there's clearly some idea that pag hindi siya Agriculture Secretary, perhaps he could be better cushioned from future backlash should the food inflation crisis persist. Now, of course, we wish the best for the new agriculture secretary. We hope that the food inflation situation will be resolved. And more importantly, I hope that we come up with structural reforms. We deal with the feudalistic system we have on the ground. I know it's not easy. I know it's very risky. I'm not sure if a businessman is the best person to do it, but you never know, right? And then at the same time, I hope there'll be a holistic approach to dealing with this issue. because yung issue ng agricultural sector development is inevitably tied to not only food security but also industrialization and manufacturing. Anyone who's bothered to study development in neighboring countries like Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, among others, and China and Vietnam more recently, so five very diverse countries in terms of their political systems. One of the big reasons why they were able to build big industries was because they were first able to resolve their food security issues and create markets at the markets in the rural areas that took care of the first wave of light manufacturing, right? So in Taiwan, in South Korea, even in Japan, for instance, a lot of their conglomerates, industries, their first customers were people who wanted tractors or motorbikes in agriculture in rural areas, and then from there they could build slowly and slowly, because if you don't need to spend money on importing food and you have food security, you can put that capital and channel that capital into building manufacturing sector, industry sector, right? And at the same time, if you build a robust agricultural economy, you're also going to help build a middle class, including in the rural areas, which will be your customer for your relatively rudimentary light manufacturing products, or let's say more low-end machines, etc. That's how a lot of industries were built in Japan and Korea and all of these countries, right? So for anyone who's familiar with the success story of developmental states in Taiwan, in South Korea, Japan, you will see that connection. You will see that connection. That's a very important connection. In fact, the Asian Development Bank a few years ago also reaffirmed that countries like the Philippines, developing countries like the Philippines, if they want to move up the ladder, they have to have a comprehensive, synchronized developmental strategy whereby yung improvement sa kanilang agricultural sector ay sumasabay dun sa kanilang industrialization and all. All of these things have to go together. And of course, building the basic infrastructure, public infrastructure, connecting the rural to the urban, building facilities to make sure that yung cost of transportation is reduced in terms of food transportation, in terms of food exports, in terms of helping, no? Making sure yung mga farmers natin are not are not praised to predatory intermediaries. All of those things in terms of providing them basic financial support. Kaya nga land bank, kaya nga yung mga Philippine development, national development, mahalaga lahat mga yan. So you need this kind of synchronized, multi-level national industrial agricultural strategy that has to be coordinated. It's like a Rubik's Cube. It has to be coordinated. Hindi pwedeng bara-bara, you go on this, you don't go on that. Now, the sad thing here is, we're not even having these conversations in our mainstream discussion. These are things you see in policy papers of Asian Development Bank. You see these things in terms of debates among development economists and political economists and policy experts. But the reality is that's really the best way for us to move forward. And kanina kausap natin isang cabinet minister from Japan, and I was talking about investments in the Philippines. You want the Philippines to move into more high-end productions, no? And the reality is that we still have to deal with the very basics and fundamentals before becoming an attractive country for more and more sophisticated investments. That's what we have to keep in mind. Kasi walang saysay yung pagbisita mo around the world kung hindi pa rin maayos yung conditions doon on the ground. Because hindi naman uto-uto yung mga investors. Porket nakita nila yung presidente mo na magaling magsalita, hindi naman sila mag-invest dahil magaling magsalita yung presidente mo or masarap siyang kahalubilo. Which I think is the case for BBM. Is someone nice to talk to for all this business. But investors talk to experts, including to yours truly. They have their own research bodies. They look at the electricity rate, they look at the water rate, they look at the basic infrastructure, they look at corruption, they look at red tape. So we have to fix all of those basic things. And among those things that we have to fix is also food security, agricultural sector, right? In fact, one of the reasons why sobrang congested yung mga urban areas natin is because of the rural poverty. People are forced to go to urban areas kahit walang proper socialized housing, walang proper infrastructure, because there's nothing really left for them. There's not much of a future for them in the rural areas. So we have to fix those problems. This is huge. So I hope, if this was really the wish of new Secretary of Agriculture, Laurel, then I hope, it's a situation whereby this brings out the best in him, rather than be careful what you wish for kind of situation. Because this is a very difficult, Very difficult but long neglected department. Alright? I'll keep it there. Marami pa tayong pwedeng pag-usapan. Bukas na lang yung kay Prime Minister Kishida. Let's talk more about Philippine-Japan-US alliance, trilateral alliance, JAFUS as I call it. There's so much more to discuss. But in the meantime, I just felt mahalaga na pag-usapan itong issue ng agricultural industrial policy. Because unfortunately, this is what's usually not discussed, and that's what's overlooked in a lot of our national conversation. For half a century, this is not Pinoy, this is not Dilawan. For half a century, our elite effectively exported their problems in order to cover up for their failures to build a strong economy in the Philippines. Through what? Through essentially forcing millions of our kababayan to work abroad, and a lot of them in very difficult conditions. Very, very difficult conditions. No? I've been all around Europe. I've been all around Middle East. I've talked to Filipino seamen. I have talked to Filipinos working in many, many sectors, in many, many countries. In Hong Kong, in Malaysia, in Middle East, in Europe. Of course, some countries are better than others. I mean, for me, siguro maganda if you go to Scandinavia, countries with good welfare systems, countries that have respect the rights of foreign workers. But at the same time, I know in some European countries, yung mga kababayan natin na medyo TNT, they really live very precarious life. I know these things almost firsthand because people close to my heart also work in this country. So they tell me these stories, and so unless we build our own agriculture sector, build our own economy, what's gonna happen is the Philippines is not really gonna be a full-fledged dynamic economy. It's gonna be an economy dependent on remittances. I think of all emerging economies, Philippines is the most dependent as a share of its GDP on remittances from OFWs compared to other countries. This is a clear testament to the failure of our political elite to build strong industries and dynamic sectors in the Philippines, right? So we need to seriously talk about industrialization and agricultural development. The two are very related. And look at the Philippines. Where does the growth come from? Aside from remittances, it's really services sector. Look at our conglomerates. These conglomerates we have are billionaires. A lot of them have been in power for so long. They failed to build a single world-class automotive or high-tech industry. Not a single one. Not a single one. Most of them are working in real estate, and you know what I'm saying, and yung iba dyan, gina-accuse na land grabbing, you know what I'm saying, all of those stuff, no? So we have very service but low to medium end oriented service sector driven economy. We need to move out of that and move beyond that. Move beyond that. And hindi rin tayo pwede umasa forever sa BPO industry because a lot of stuff that the BPO industry has been doing can be done by the chat GPTs or AIs of this world, right? So that's why agriculture secretary position is extremely important, and my best wishes to our current secretary, and in the coming months and years, God willing, we'll follow this issue, and we'll see how the BBM administration is going to resolve fill in all the gaps and resolve the conundrum we have in the country. And again, whoever you voted for, we want our country to succeed, no? So my best wishes to our new agriculture secretary. On that note, thank you very much. Maraming salamat sa lahat ng mga sumusuporta sa atin, sa lahat ng mga nakikinig sa atin. I really appreciate this. I know some of these topics are a little bit technical, a little bit quote-unquote boring. Some of these topics perhaps I've not explained properly enough, or I've not explained deeply enough. So despite all of those limitations, I hope you're appreciating at least the sensibilities I'm trying to transmit here. And I hope you also appreciate the priorities, economic priorities, and issues that I feel are not properly discussed in the Philippines. I mean, I don't know about others, but every time I talk to our international partners and allies, whether it's a cabinet minister from Japan, whether it's an expert who's advising the president of Taiwan, whether it's someone who's advising the White House or whatever, I always raise this issue. Please invest in the Philippines. Please help us to upgrade our system. Please help us to be a truly dynamic economy. And always the answer I get is, yes, we're happy to help you, but you have to help yourself first. Meaning, get the basics right. And getting the basics right, one important way of doing that is getting agriculture sector right, getting the cabinet positions right, getting the overall policies right, having a vision of industrial and trade policy. That is very important. On that note, maraming salamat sa lahat ng mga sumusuporta sa atin. And God willing, catch up soon. Talk to you soon.